this has clearly been a big disruption to our industry as well as a lot of industry, and certainly no handbook for this or even any recent experience that we can really draw upon. But when I look at this, I really break it down to really in two things, and that is it's a health crisis as well as an economic crisis. And when you look at the health crisis side of things, the biggest issue for office space has been that most people are now working from home. And it's really been a big experiment for a lot of organizations. They've been able to figure this out very quickly. And the question is when we come back to the office, what will change? What will that look like? And I think short term, I think employees, are going to be concerned about, social distancing. You're going to have employers that, may have had higher density. They already have existing space, and they may look to rotate people back in just to kind of de-densify the space a little bit. I think employees are going to be concerned about, cleaning and sanitizing. Air quality and ventilation is going to be even more important if people were to look at their systems and what can they do to bring more outside air, fresh air, filtration. I think is important to their employees. But I think overall, just this trend towards maybe more of a healthy building, I think is what we'll see. And then long term, what is that working from home impact going to be on the design of office space? And I think a lot of people, some people really like working from home and some people really hate it. But I think where a lot of people are going to fall is, having that flexibility. Maybe I could be at the office but work from home a day or two a week. And so employers are going to have to make a decision on, how they determine how they use the space and what flexibility they give them. They're still going to have to provide workstations for everybody or spots for them if they're still all working at the office just on a flexibility, some days working from home. The one way to maybe contract space a little bit is to do unassigned desks that I think would be a concern for employees today because I don't think they want to share workspaces together. So that's something they'll have to look at a little bit. If you have a really high density, I think that companies may have to look at densifying a little bit. That may cause people to take a little bit more space as they look to reevaluate their design. And, even speaking of density, I think, you look at what happened in New York, there was this trend toward urbanism, and maybe people will look at that differently and maybe a little bit more trend towards suburban locations because that density is so high. But economically, I think is going to have that economic crisis will have probably a bigger impact, on the office space. This shutdown really is going to have an impact on a lot of businesses and their revenues. So office space houses jobs. So if people aren't hiring, or if they're laying off people, there's going to be less demand for office space. So I think that one key metric you always look at, or at least I look at, is the unemployment rate, and especially the unemployment rate that affects the office users, versus maybe the retail users. And I think that's going to have a bigger impact on the office market, especially on the demand for it. But in the end, we really don't know how all this is playing out, still playing out day to day. We don't know when we're going to get back into our office. We don't know when I'm going to have a lunch meeting or attend these type of events. But we do know when we get back to the office that it's going to be different than the way it was when we were back in the working in the office. It's just going to be a little bit different world. But you do learn some things along the way. I certainly, one thing I think I've learned along this crisis is how to really work Zoom and Microsoft Teams, because I'm on virtual calls all the time. So, but that's kind of my comments on the office.
Well, one quick follow-up for you, and then we'll let you go. The question I kind of have is, as this, when we first were looking at it, things looked like maybe we'll be out of this in a relatively short time. As the timeline has continued to go longer, what type of concern would you have for folks that aren't able to pay leases and things like that from a business standpoint on office space?
Well, I think that's a concern that everybody's dealing with right now, and there's kind of that whole continuum between the tenants that rent to the landlords that have loans with, with the banks. And I do think as this drags out longer, there's just going to be more stress associated with that. Rent relief, there's going to be more of those requests. And I think people are trying to figure those things out as they go. So I think there's, going to be some impact. Obviously, the government has impact on that too, as to when we get back or what kind of stimulus that they provide. But it's still playing out.